Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I've got a kind of review or overview of this electronic drum set that I got from Roland. So this one specifically is Roland's TD-1DMK model. So the TD1 is kind of their lowest cost, beginner, intro level electronic kit. And then it has the mesh drum heads on here. So this thing obviously is not what I would normally play. I play a lot of wind instruments and stuff, but recently I kind of just got an itch to play drums. I've always thought they're really cool, and I knew almost nothing about them. So I figured, well, I have a little bit of space, I have a little extra money. Why not grab some and try it out, see if I could learn it. Which it's going pretty well, which is great. It's a lot of fun. Drums are super cool. If you guys are looking to get into it, definitely recommend it. And this may be something that you could use to get started. We'll get into that in a second. But first, let's go over just some of the basic specs on this thing. So obviously, as you can see, it's got, well, you might not be able to see this one, it's blocked by the hi-hat, but you have a snare, two high mid-tom, and then one floor tom. Of course, these three toms are all the same size. So the sizes of these drums are actually, it's an 8-inch snare, and all three toms are the same size at 6 inches. And then you also have three cymbals, a hi-hat, and then a crash and a ride, pretty much. Of course, these could be whatever you want since it's all electronic. But the cymbals are all 10-inch cymbals, with only the pretty much front third or so being rubber, since that's what you would normally hit. And then down below, we have the hi-hat pedal, which is just a regular trigger pedal with a potentiometer in there. Your pretty standard switch pedal, so to say, not any sort of real pedal or a hi-hat stand or anything like that. But on the other side, the bass pedal, actually it doesn't come with a bass pedal. Normally, we'll get into that in a second, but it has the bass drum pad. So you can use a standard bass drum pedal of your choosing. You can even use a double pedal since it's wider, which is one of the good features of this. So I think that's pretty cool. And that's just kind of the general overview along with this module. So the TD1 module is, like I said, their basic one. It gives you not a whole ton of customizability. You have, I believe it's 15 presets for different drum kits, but that's it, right? You can't change around the sounds. You can't put them into different kits or modify them or add your own. I believe there is a way to add your own, but it's complicated. Sometimes it costs money. You can hook it up to your computer and things like that. I'll go over a little bit more of that later, but that's the general overview of this. So, more specifically, what are some pros and cons of this thing? So, first off, pros, it's small, which is great compared to especially, some of the larger kits that they have, or even, of course, an acoustic set. So, this thing measures approximately 4 feet across, 3 feet deep. Of course, you'd like a little bit of extra room. I wasn't counting like my throne being way out here or anything, or if I have like my music stand in the back, or maybe extra room for the cymbals. But anyway, so it's really small. As you can see, I've pretty much got it shoved into the corner of my room, which is really great because I don't have a lot of space in here, obviously. So that's a really good option. But also being quiet. I'm in an apartment here, so having loud noises is obviously not great. You just annoy the neighbors or annoy my roommates. You don't want that. So that was one of the reasons that I got this. And I think the mesh heads, I've been told, are slightly quieter than rubber pads, although it might be negligible. I'm not sure. I've only gotten to play this, luckily, but it is pretty quiet. So I don't know if you can hear, if I'll do a little test. Right? They're not very loud. The only thing is the bass pedal does make a little bit of noise. It's a bit more of a thump. And with that, I actually have a silent beater head on my pedal so that it's a lot quieter than your standard bass drum beater on that rubber pad. You can also put things on the rubber pad. Maybe I used a cloth, like a hand towel, and I kind of put it over, and it got rid of a lot of the sensitivity of it, so it wasn't great, but before I got this silent head, it did the job. So there are ways to get around that, but that's one of the biggest things if you are above, like a second or third story of an apartment. Luckily, I'm on the first floor, but if you're on a second story or above, your neighbors will probably hear the vibrations traveling through the ground. There's tons of videos on that, how to dampen that, how to make risers and stuff, so go look that up if you like. But otherwise, the drum mesh heads are pretty quiet. The cymbals are a little bit louder because they are just hard rubber. But I had my roommates sit outside in the living room and in their room next door, and I played a little bit, and they said, well, we can hear some taps, but if we're listening to music, watching TV, we're not really going to notice, so as long as that's okay, you'll probably be able to get away with it, especially because this apartment has really thin walls. So them being able to hear not very much is great. So in maybe a more modern apartment, something a little more normal, even a house, say, you'll probably be just fine playing this. Maybe not into all hours of the night, but during the day and the evenings, it's pretty quiet. So another pro is these mesh heads, as I mentioned. They give you a little bit more of a real feel. I have, like I said, I've just started playing drums, and I've really only been learning on this, but I've fiddled around on a couple acoustic sets, so I can't really say how real they feel. But I did play on a rubber set for a very short while a couple years ago just to test it out, and I prefer the feel of these mesh heads way more. I think it's a lot more fun, a little more bouncy, so that's another plus that we have there. Another one is the use of a real bass pedal, as I mentioned, especially a double pedal, which is great. Some of these come with the regular rubber pedal or rubber sensor, and you can use a regular pedal, but they're too small to use a double pedal. So that's another great advantage. I had a double pedal on here, actually, see it sitting back here, but obviously since I just started, I couldn't get any use out of it, and I didn't like the action, so I actually upgraded to a DW5000 single pedal, and it's been great. I've been using it for just a couple days, and it works great on this thing. So if you have one already, or you're coming over from an acoustic set and you've already got a pedal, you can use it right on there, and you can use a double pedal if you'd like, and it triggers just fine. It works great, and it's adjustable up and down and around and all that kind of stuff. Another thing is that it's really simple to use. So that can also be a con. We'll get to that in a second. But since the module just has a couple preset kits and a couple other options, you can have coaching, and there's different songs you can play along to. I'll go over that briefly in a bit. But just the simplicity of you plug everything in. It's pretty easy. I didn't have to set this up since I had bought it used, but I looked at some of the connections, and it labels, snare, tom 1, tom 2, crash, ride, whatever. So it's pretty easy to see, okay, I just plug one into, whichever one it goes to. They're labeled more or less, and I believe they have videos on setup as well. And then plonk it down, turn it on, and you're pretty much going, right? There's not a whole lot of configuration, since there's not a whole lot of configuration that you can do anyway. So that's something that could be a positive, right? Is that you're just plugging in and go. So on the cons side is actually that it is too simple. So that, it goes both ways. So while I liked the simplicity when I first started of, cool, I can just choose my favorite preset and I'll start playing, I quickly realized that being a musician, I could notice that the sounds were not very good. And I kind of got a little irked that I couldn't change them, right? Like, having the presets is great. Having the set certain sounds is nice. I would have liked if they just went a little bit extra and let me add just a couple of user kits where I could put in the sounds that I like from different kits into one. Just that little bit probably would have been enough for me, just because, I'm playing and say I really like the sound of the ride cymbal, right? I'm like, oh, the ride cymbal sounds great. But then I go on and hit the snare drum and it sounds terrible. I'm like, oh, well, that's not the sound I want, and well, then I try and find a kit that has both and nothing has both, or maybe it does. But then the crash sounds really bad. I'm like, well, I don't want that crash sound with this kit, and on and on and on. So not having the customizability can be a bit of a drawback. But, especially if you're just starting off, or maybe for a kid, if they're learning, you probably won't need any of that. Or maybe you want to go the route of plugging it into a computer. There are plenty of good softwares and tons of stuff out there you can plug in your computer, run the sound off of that. I gave it a try, and I couldn't get the latency good enough. Again, I didn't want to mess with it too much. I figured, forget it, I'll just deal with it right now. But if you have a little more time to put into that, that could be an option. Or maybe you run it to, Raspberry Pi, and that, spits out the audio for you. And anyway, so there are ways to get around that. Some of them cost money, some of them don't. But for me, it just ended up being too much hassle. So simplicity actually can be a downside. Another con that is also one of the pros is that it's small. So I like that it is physically small. I do not like that the drums themselves are small, right? So the size of the drum is actually physically bigger than the march size of the head. So even though this is an 8-inch snare, it's a 10-inch body. So if you can see here, I'll take this one off real fast. These have this plastic rim around which holds the mesh head on, and then another rubber rim around that. So that makes this very big compared to the actual size of the head. And this is kind of a bummer because a lot of times I'll be trying to play, and not only is this pretty small, especially for a floor tom, but it has this plastic rim around, and I'll find myself whacking this rim by accident. You know, I'm trying to do something, and I just don't quite have the coordination to hit it right in these little spaces here, and I'll end up clicking on the plastic or hitting, you know, the big thick rim, and these rims aren't as thick as some other drums that I've seen, which is nice, but still, having this plastic rim especially is not great, kind of a bummer. So that's been a little bit of a drag. So that's another thing that can kind of be one of those pros and cons. Another thing is the hi-hat pedal. So this is kind of a complaint across most beginner sets. The pedal just doesn't feel good, doesn't actuate all the time. You know, I tried to get an upgraded pedal as well, and it ended up not being that much of an upgrade. But the one that comes with it is just not great. You know, it's never going to compare to a real hi-hat stand. And a lot of times the sensitivity is just not quite there, you know, so I'll be pushing down, I think, all the way, and then I go to play and I hear that it's slightly open. I gotta push a little bit more, and there it goes, you know. And there are some ways to get around this. You can change the rubber actuator in there, and, you know, put different things on there. But I tried some of those, and it didn't quite get me where I wanted. But for an entry level kit, it's probably all right. I just, you know, I'd like a better one, and I will eventually upgrade it, but just something to keep in mind if you're, you know, if you've been playing drums for a while, you'll probably find that a little bit annoying. So next, let's go over some of the features on the module. So like I said, it's pretty simple. There are tons and tons of breakdowns on the module itself, but let me just give you a quick run through of what we got here. All right, here's the module, got it turned on. So just a quick overview. What we've got is 4 different settings: drums, which is the kit that you're selecting the sounds on; the tempo, which is for the metronome. You can change all the metronome settings, things like that; coach, which is has some extra functions like you know, tempo checking, so you can play along with the backing track, see if you get the right tempo, if you hit the right notes for whatever groove you're doing. It can kind of give you some very basic feedback on things like that for learning. And then song, where it has a couple of default song settings in there that you can play along to, backing tracks pretty much. And that's kind of neat. There's a couple of them in there. So for drums, you know, we've got plus and minus, which obviously flip us through the different kits. I'll give a little bit of a demo on that later. And you've only got 15, right? So that's it. They're all preset. And they're all different kinds. There's a list somewhere I found once that showed what the different ones kind of were. But anyway, they've all got some different sounds. There's some electronic ones, some, you know, funk and rock, and some, you know, jazz, different ones in there. So that's fun to play around with. Next, we've got the tempo, so you can change it. Sorry, that was volume. So you can change the tempo here, up and down, and that's for the metronome here, which says, as you'd expect, give you a metronome sound. So that can be kind of useful when you're practicing your time and things like that. And then next up, we've got coach. So there are different settings. Honestly, I've never used this, so I don't know too much about it. Again, there are tons of videos out there of people going really in depth on what each of these ones do. I think Roland has our own video as well. I'll try and link it below, but they show you a little bit more in depth of what these do. But there's some cool coaching functions there. And then songs, you can choose which ones you want. You know, there's all these different variations here, and it just gives you different beats and backing tracks to kind of play along to. So that's a little bit more fun, something to get into as you learn. So my final thoughts on this: it's a pretty good starter set. You know, it's not quite as expensive as some of their higher end stuff. It's one of the cheaper ones that you can get with the mesh heads and things like that, which is really nice. But overall, I think it's really for the very beginner players, which is great. You know, we need stuff in that range. For me specifically, I'm going to upgrade a lot of this stuff. I've already been looking at how I can get an acoustic set, convert it to electronic, and do that whole thing. It's going to be an interesting project if I can ever get to it. It ends up being kind of expensive, as you can imagine, even piecing it together. So if you guys are interested in something like that, let me know. Maybe I'll document my construction of making that. I think it'd be pretty cool. Of course, I need a little more room, but anyway, yeah. But the things I actually upgraded already is the drum module. So I've got right here, I went out and bought a TD-17. So this one is one of the more high-end versions, probably a little more overkill than I needed, but I really like it. I plugged it in to, it uses the same cable snake here, so I just plugged it in, set it up, and it was night and day difference. The sounds are so much better. I can configure all sorts of crazy stuff. It's even got Bluetooth, so I can hook up my my tablet to it. Normally I just use an aux cable to my tablet, which works well as well. You know, you can put that into here and then play along with certain tracks. But just another functionality that this thing has. So I'd really recommend upgrading the module. You know, I just don't like the sounds in this one. And if you're any kind of experienced drummer or musician, you're probably going to find it a little lackluster. And these things are expensive, a couple $100, you know, at the low end. I got lucky that this one was like $250, which is a crazy, crazy deal for one of these. But if you can afford to upgrade that and you like the rest of the kit, definitely get a new module. Highly recommend. I've also got, back here, I've got a hi-hat stand. I don't know if you can see, but I have a hi-hat stand. I bought a trigger and cymbal combo off of like AliExpress or something. It's one of the lemon ones, if you've seen those around. They're kind of a cheaper cymbal, but apparently they're fairly well made. So I'm going to give it a try, you know, and upgrade that. Of course, I upgraded my pedal. You know, I got a bit of a nicer pedal, and then I'm planning to get different cymbals and, like I said, eventually work out to have a whole new setup. Because I just keep hitting these stupid plastic rims. So anyhow, if you guys are interested in some of that stuff too, let me know. I'll show, you know, the little bits of, you know, showing off the, you know, maybe the new module with this specific kit, or showing off the hi-hat, you know, once I get that all set up. So, but other than that, I'm going to give a little bit of a demo of some of these sounds and playing along with some stuff. So again, I'm not much of a drummer. I've just started learning, so this will just give you an idea of the sounds. There are plenty of other videos that go way more in depth to it, but I want to give you an idea of what this sounds like, a little bit of a couple of the sounds, and thanks for watching. I hope you liked it. Okay, psych, never mind. I tried to plug this in to my computer, and apparently it's a little different the way that it works. It works as a MIDI controller, so you hook it up to drum software. Then it just takes the input of this pad is being hit and plays the sounds from the computer. I couldn't find any great free software that would let me also record, and I fiddled around with it for like an hour. I tried to use the output from the headphones to go to my computer, to go to the recording software through my interface. It would not let me. I couldn't figure it out, so I just figured there's plenty of other videos. I'm going to link a couple down below showing the sounds of this thing. So sorry about that. Sorry I couldn't get it to work, but you know, just it happens, whatever. I didn't realize that I couldn't just easily hook it up to my computer and record the output, but hey, that's just how it is. You know, I hadn't tried it before. So anyhow, I hope you liked this video anyway. If you have any questions about this, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'll answer it the best I can. And otherwise, thanks for watching.